Hello my fellow true crime lovers, welcome to my channel. My name is Liz and today we're going to be starting a new series on the channel. We're going to be talking about the most infamous serial killers from every single state in the US. So sit back, relax, grab a blanket because this is going to be a killer story. Wait, I did not look up how to say this man's name.
Serial killer Thomas Whisenhant.
Whisenhant. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Thomas Whisenhant. Now this is a serial killer who's responsible for killing 3 women and assaulting many more. And this story is going to be taking place in good sweet home Alabama. Thomas Whisenhant was born on January 29th, 1947. He was the youngest of 4 siblings. He also lived with his mom and dad, but unfortunately, behind closed doors, it was not the best living situation. His mother would oftentimes verbally and physically assault her husband, and also would encourage her children to do the same, and even more so when her husband was drunk, given that he had a problem with alcoholism. Oddly enough, however, Thomas's mother never had any issues with her children, and she was actually very protective of all 4 of her kids. However, she was especially protective of Thomas, so much so that she would go as far as sharing the same bed with him until he was the age of 7 years old, and they would share the same room until he was 16. Now, spending all of that time together slowly made Thomas resent his own mother. And even his sister said because of this, around that same age of 16 is when he started to get aggressive and violent. That same year, when Thomas was 16, on May 6, 1963, a 72-year-old woman by the name of Lexi Haynes was found to be shot dead in her home. Police at the scene found the gun that unalived Lexi in a parking lot that happened to be right next to Thomas's home. Given that the murder weapon was found right next to his house, and the fact that Thomas was recently arrested for robbing a blind woman, he was right away seen as a suspect in this murder case. For a quick side note, this robbery case was thrown out in court due to multiple technicalities. Now, police did take Thomas into the station for questioning, because right before the murder had taken place, someone had seen him and his friends playing with a handgun. The witness said she saw Thomas take a bullet out of the gun, hold it up, and say, "I'm going to kill somebody soon." However, he was no longer seen as a suspect due to the fact that his family was able to provide an alibi saying that he was home during the time of the murder. A couple years after that, Thomas decided to join the US Air Force, and he ended up being stationed in Colorado. And this is where things began to pick up just a little bit. Not long after Thomas joined the Air Force, he had attacked 22-year-old Rose Covington, who was another member of the US Air Force. He then beat her with a metal ashtray until she had fallen unconscious, where she would suffer severe injuries to her head and her face. And it was so bad that she had to be hospitalized for over 2 months after the attack. During the trial, Rose explained that she had never met Thomas prior to the attack. And even with the shoes from the crime scene matching those of Thomas, he still denied ever attacking Rose. But this time he was convicted with assault with intent to commit murder, where he would now spend 20 years in jail. However, in 1970, his sentence was reduced to 10 years. And then 3 years after that, he was granted parole, having him only spend about 7 years in jail for this crime. Now, after he had gotten out of prison is when things really started to get out of hand. Not even 2 years later, on November 21st, 1975, Thomas attacked 28-year-old Patricia Hitt. She was a mother of 2 working at a convenience store as a clerk. He had approached her, beat her, then fatally shot her in the head. However, in this case as well, 2 other men were charged for her murder, and Thomas had gotten away with yet another killing. And not even a year later, Thomas would end up kidnapping and killing another store clerk by the name of Honora Hyatt. He had taken her from the place she worked at, brought her to an abandoned house where he then shot and killed her and left her body in an abandoned shack. And if that wasn't weird enough for you, he then returned to the crime scene the next day where he then mutilated her body, stole the watch that she was wearing, and gave it to his wife as a present. 'Cause that's nice. And then later that same year in October, Thomas would kidnap another store clerk by the name of Cheryl Lynn. This time, he held her at gunpoint, got her to get into his car, where he then drove into a random area in the woods where he began to essay her in the front seat of his car. He then shot her in the head, killing her, and then dragged her body deeper into the woods. And yet again, Thomas returned to the crime scene the very next day, and he began to mutilate her body, this time with cutting out a chunk of her breast and repeatedly stabbing her abdomen. However, this would also be the time where Thomas's luck finally started to run out, as it was just his luck that a hiker happened to be walking by at the time that he had returned to the crime scene, and that hiker did in fact call the cops. And after a long chase, the cops finally caught up to him, and they arrested him. During Thomas's interrogation is when he started to confess every single crime he'd ever committed, and he even admitted to abusing his wife on several different occasions. The trial began on August 1st, 1977, where Thomas pled not guilty for reasons of insanity. At the end of the trial, the jury concluded that he was in fact guilty and recommended the death penalty. Now, Thomas was clearly obviously not happy about being on death row, so much so that he was able to successfully delay his execution for 3 decades. He would successfully appeal his case multiple times, enabling his execution to be put off for so long. However, eventually the Assistant Attorney General did file a motion for his execution date to be set, which was set for May 27th of 2010. On the day of his execution, Thomas had chose to die through lethal injection. His last meal consisted of chicken legs, French fries, chocolate pudding, an orange drink, and coffee. He ended up spending a grand total of 32 years, 8 months, and 28 days on death row, being the longest person ever in the state of Alabama to stay in death row. And that, my friends, is the story of Thomas Whisenhant. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Killer Stories Across the US. Bye!